In the world of forensic psychology, there's a test. It's called the Psychopathy Checklist Revised, the PCLR. It scores individuals on a scale of 0 to 40. The average person scores between 1 and 4. Anything above 30 is considered a high-scoring psychopath. Ted Bundy scored a 39, Jeffrey Dahmer a 23. In 2018, a forensic psychologist evaluated a convicted killer and scored him at 35.8, higher than Dahmer, nearly as high as Bundy. That killer was 15 years old when he committed his crime. This is the case of Daniel Marsh, and what it reveals about psychopathy, adolescent violence, and the darkest corners of the human mind is something that forensic experts are still debating to this day. But before we get inside his mind, we need to talk about the two people he took from this world, because they deserve to be remembered as more than victims of a crime. Davis, California, about 15 miles west of Sacramento, a quiet college town, the kind of place people move to specifically because it feels safe, low crime, friendly neighbors, the University of California campus at its center. In 1995, a woman named Claudia Maupin arrived here looking for exactly that kind of peace. Claudia was a warm, magnetic woman, the kind of person who made everyone around her feel like they were her best friend. She'd traveled through different faiths and denominations throughout her life, and eventually fell in love with the Unitarian Church in Davis. She didn't just come for the services, she came because she believed, and she said this openly, that her next husband was somewhere in that church. She was right. Oliver Northup Jr., everyone called him Chip, was one of the church's founding members, a World War II veteran, a well-known attorney, a man deeply committed to his community. He and Claudia met at that church, and according to their families, it was instant. Their daughter Victoria once described it like Kermit the Frog meeting Miss Piggy over the pews. From that moment on, they were inseparable. They married in 1996 in a ceremony that filled the entire church. Their families easily blended. Friends described them as living an idyllic life, surrounded by loved ones, safe, happy. They had been married for 17 years when, on the evening of April 13, 2013, they said goodnight to each other in their Davis condominium. It would be the last time. The next morning, Sunday, neither Chip nor Claudia showed up to church. People noticed immediately. This was a couple who never missed a service. Calls went to voicemail. Chip didn't show up to his folk band rehearsal that afternoon. Family members went to check on them. Chip's son Robert arrived first. He rang the doorbell, no answer. He had a key, but chose not to use it. Everything appeared as though the couple had simply gone out of town. Later that evening, Claudia's stepdaughter Laura also stopped by. When no one answered, she walked around to the back of the condo. And that's when she saw it. A window screen, slashed open, and through the bedroom window, bloodstains. Laura called the family called the police, and when officers entered that condo, what they found inside would be described by the Yolo County District Attorney as, and I'm quoting directly, the most horrific, depraved murder I've ever seen. 128 stab wounds, 61 on Chip, 67 on Claudia. But the stab wounds weren't even the worst of it. What I'm about to describe is disturbing, but these details are part of the court record, and they're essential to understanding the psychology of the person who did this. After killing Chip and Claudia, the perpetrator didn't leave. He stayed. He experimented with their bodies. He dissected them. He cut open their torsos. He placed a cell phone inside Claudia's abdomen. He placed a drinking glass inside Chip's stomach. Now, pause here for a moment, because this detail is going to become critically important when we analyze the psychology later. The question isn't just who would do this, it's why would someone place objects inside their victims? What does that behavior tell us about what's happening inside the mind of the person doing it? We'll come back to that. What investigators found equally disturbing was what they did not find. No fingerprints, no DNA, no footprints, no weapon left behind, nothing stolen. The condo wasn't ransacked. This was not a burglary gone wrong. This was not random. And whoever did this left virtually no physical trace. The only clue was that slashed window screen, but even that raised questions. Investigators weren't sure if the window was the actual point of entry or if it was staged to look that way. They believed someone with a key might have entered through the front door and cut the screen to divert attention. If that was the case, it pointed to someone close, someone who knew Chip and Claudia, someone who had access to their home. And that suspicion would lead investigators down a painful path before the truth surfaced.
25 FBI agents flooded the neighborhood. Experienced task force officers from across the region joined local police. The crime appeared deeply personal, the extreme violence, the ritualistic behavior, the fact that nothing was stolen. In the minds of investigators, this had to be someone close to the victims, a family dispute, a personal grudge, someone with a key to that condo. And that thinking led them directly to Chip Northupp's own family. Chip's son, Robert, had a key to the condo. He was one of the first people to visit the home when his father went missing. His son, Oliver, suffered from schizophrenia. His other son, Tony, had drawn a disturbing image, a man with a knife standing over two children in a bed. When police searched Robert's home, they found something that made their suspicions spike: carpeting that had been steam cleaned on the same day as the murders. Robert explained it was terrible timing. He'd scheduled the carpet cleaning before the murders and had no idea it would coincide with the same weekend. But from the outside, it looked like someone was destroying evidence. The family cooperated fully. Oliver submitted to 14 hours of questioning over 2 days, no lawyer, because, as he put it, his father would have wanted them to cooperate. The family spent thousands on legal defense. Neighbors whispered. And Tony, who had been singled out, whose strange drawing had been scrutinized, whose name had been attached to suspicion, never recovered. 3 years after the murders, Tony Northupp took his own life. His brother Oliver got a tattoo in his memory. A grieving family, already shattered by the murder of their father and stepmother, now had to bury another member, and the killer was still out there. But then, 2 months after the murders, the Davis Police Department received a phone call that changed everything. A 17-year-old Davis High School student called police to report that he knew who killed Chip and Claudia. It was his best friend, a 15-year-old boy named Daniel Marsh. Now, here's where this case takes a turn that nobody saw coming, because Daniel Marsh wasn't some troubled kid from the margins. He was, at one point, considered a local hero. At 10 years old, Daniel used CPR to save his father Bill from a heart attack. He received an American Red Cross Heroes Award for it. The local community celebrated him. The Yolo County District Attorney himself remembers hearing about it and thinking, and I'm quoting, "This kid is going places." He was right, just not in the direction anyone expected. And what happened between that moment of heroism at 10 and those murders at 15 is a psychological journey that forensic experts are still trying to fully understand. Daniel's father, Bill Marsh, actually lived right next door to Chip and Claudia. He'd moved there just before the murders, and Daniel lived at his mother's house, just a short walk away. But how did a 15-year-old, a former hero, end up on the other end of a murder investigation? To understand that, we need to understand what was happening inside Daniel Marsh's mind in the years between saving a life and taking two.
The tip came from Alvaro Garab, Daniel's best friend. And what Alvaro told investigators wasn't just a hunch. He knew details about the murders, graphic, specific details that only a handful of investigators and the killer himself could have known. He knew about the dissection. He knew about the objects placed inside the bodies. He knew about the attempt to remove an eye. Details that had never been made public. Alvaro told investigators that Daniel talked about killing people constantly. At first, he didn't take it seriously, but after the murders, Daniel started describing what he'd done in detail. And then he started talking about doing it again. Alvaro said Daniel had threatened to kill again. He'd been lurking the streets of Davis at night with a baseball bat, looking for another victim. Alvaro feared for his own life, his family, his friends. And Daniel's escalation pattern was textbook. Before we get to the interrogation, let me walk you through what investigators and psychologists later pieced together about the years leading up to the murders. At 10 years old, Daniel's parents divorced. His mother left his father for Daniel's kindergarten teacher, a woman. Daniel was enraged. Between 10 and 12, he began self-harming, cutting himself. He developed anorexia and was hospitalized for 25 days. By 12 and 13, he discovered gore websites. He became obsessed, watching beheading videos, graphic violent content. His best friend Alvaro described walking into Daniel's room and seeing him watching people being beheaded, fascinated. At 13, he strangled a neighborhood cat to death. When asked why, his answer was chilling. "I just wanted to do that." At 14, he began fantasizing about killing his mother's partner. He told Alvaro, "I want to strangle her to death." He also attempted suicide 4 times. Then, in December 2012, just 4 months before the murders, Daniel Marsh told a school counselor that he fantasized about killing people. She was so concerned that police were called to the school. Daniel was hospitalized, he was evaluated, and he was released. 4 months later, Chip Northup and Claudia Maupin were dead. Look at that timeline. Really look at it. Because what you're seeing is a pattern that forensic psychologists have identified across hundreds of cases. The self-harm, the animal cruelty, the obsession with graphic violence, the escalation from fantasy to planning to action. And here's what's critical. In December 2012, just 4 months before the murders, Daniel told a school counselor that he fantasized about killing people. He was hospitalized, he was released, and 4 months later, 2 people were dead. That's not hindsight. Those were warning signs, loud ones, that the system failed to act on. On June 17, 2013, 2 months after the murders, the high school resource officer pulled Daniel Marsh out of class and brought him to investigators. Daniel seemed happy to talk. Detective Ariel Pineda and FBI Special Agent Chris Campion would spend the next 3 hours with him. And what unfolded in that room is a masterclass in both interrogation technique and the behavioral tells of psychopathy. In the beginning, Daniel played it cool. He told investigators he only knew what anyone would know, that someone had broken into an old couple's house and killed them. That's it. But Campion was experienced. He didn't press immediately. Instead, he spent time getting to know Daniel, his childhood, his parents' divorce, his mother's affair, his eating disorder, his self-harm. Campion was doing something very deliberate. He was building a psychological profile in real time, identifying what mattered to Daniel, what triggered him, where his emotional weak points were. Every personal detail Daniel shared was a tool Campion could use later. And Daniel, he talked freely.
He talked about his parents' divorce, about hating his mother's partner, about the cutting, about feeling nothing. Then, 3 hours and 38 minutes into the interview, the facade cracked. Campion challenged him. "Why would you just sit here and bald-faced lie to us?" Daniel responded, "You guys are threatening me." Campion pressed, "With what?" And Daniel said, "The truth, getting arrested for 2 murders. I am so scared right now. Of course, I'm going to do anything I can to try and say that I didn't do this." Pay attention to what just happened there. Daniel didn't say, "I didn't do it." He said, "Of course, I'm going to do anything I can to try and say that I didn't do this." That's a critical distinction. He's not denying the act, he's explaining why he's been performing the denial. In statement analysis, this is what experts call a linguistic slip. Deceptive individuals often unconsciously reveal the truth through their word choices. Instead of a firm denial, "I didn't do it," they describe the act of denying. The brain knows the truth, even when the mouth is trying to lie. And then came the confession, not reluctant, not tearful, almost eager. Daniel told them, "That night, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to do it. I lost control. I got a hole in the screen, climbed in through the back, went to their bedroom. I opened the door and I just kind of stood over their bed watching them sleep for a few minutes. My body was trembling. I was nervous but excited and exhilarated. I was actually going to do it. I was there. It's finally happening." Read those words carefully. Nervous but excited, exhilarated. It's finally happening. This is not someone describing a moment of madness or a psychotic break. This is someone describing the fulfillment of a long-held fantasy. And the way he describes what came next is where the psychology becomes truly chilling. He said, "I'm not going to lie. It felt amazing. Pure happiness and adrenaline and dopamine, just all of it rushing over me." He said his school performance improved after the murders. His mood lifted. He was named Student of the Month. The high of killing, his word not mine, lasted for weeks. And when Agent Campion asked Daniel one final question, the answer revealed something that would haunt every investigator on this case. Campion said, "You mentioned that pretty much everybody you meet, you have thoughts of killing them and how you would kill them." Daniel confirmed, "Yeah." Campion asked, "So, how would you kill me?" Daniel answered without hesitation, "There's a lot of ways. Choking you to death with your tie, beating your face into the mirror until it broke and using the glass to cut your arteries, gouging your eyes out and smashing your face into the wall." Then he added, "Nothing personal." Daniel Marsh was arrested immediately and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder.
This is where most channels stop. They tell you the story, they show you the confession, they move on to the verdict. But this is true crime buried, and we don't just ask what happened, we ask why. And in the case of Daniel Marsh, the why is where some of the most fascinating and divisive psychological analysis in modern criminal history begins. So let's dig in. After his conviction, forensic psychologist Dr. Matthew Logan evaluated Daniel Marsh using the PCLR, the Psychopathy Checklist Revised. This is the gold standard, developed by Dr. Robert Hare. 20 traits, each scored on a scale of 0 to 2. Maximum possible score is 40. The average person scores between 1 and 4. A score above 30 is the clinical threshold for psychopathy. Daniel Marsh scored 35.8. Let that sink in. 35.8. Higher than Jeffrey Dahmer, nearly as high as Ted Bundy. And Dr. Logan testified that this was one of the highest scores he had ever seen in his career. But what does that score actually mean? What does a 35.8 look like in a real person? The PCLR measures 4 facets: interpersonal, how the person relates to others; affective, how they experience emotions; lifestyle, how they live; and antisocial, their behavioral history. Let's map Daniel Marsh against these. Interpersonal. Daniel presented as charming and articulate. He talked his way through a 3-hour interrogation before confessing. Agent Campion said Daniel initially believed he could simply talk his way through it. He manipulated his best friend Alvaro into keeping his secret for 2 months. He lied fluently and without hesitation to investigators. Affective. This is where it gets darkest. During his confession, Daniel described the murders with 0 emotional distress. He called it pure happiness. When asked how he would kill Agent Campion, he listed multiple methods and then said nothing personal. He showed no remorse for Chip and Claudia. He kept the murder weapon as what he called a souvenir. And here's a detail that most coverage of this case completely misses. According to the victims' family members, who spoke publicly at CrimeCon in Denver in September 2025 and in prior court proceedings, Daniel Marsh had images of the crime scene tattooed on his torso while incarcerated. The victims' family members stated that the tattoos reportedly detailed each of the 128 stab wounds he inflicted on Chip and Claudia. Claudia's daughter, Victoria Hurd, confirmed this publicly. Claudia's granddaughter, Sarah Rice, reiterated it during a 2025 CrimeCon panel alongside 48 Hours correspondent Erin Moriarty. That is not a person haunted by what they did. That is a person memorializing it. Back to the lifestyle and antisocial facets. Animal cruelty from a young age. He strangled a cat, killed a raccoon. Self-harm and reckless behavior. Obsessive consumption of extreme violent content online. And the escalation pattern we discussed earlier, from fantasy to animal cruelty to human murder, is one of the most well-documented escalation paths in criminal psychology. But here's where this case gets truly fascinating, because not everyone agreed with Dr. Logan's assessment. This is the debate that makes this case so psychologically significant. On one side, Dr. Logan and Dr. Rokop. Logan scored Marsh as a high-functioning psychopath. Rokop identified him as a sexual sadist who killed purely for self-gratification and whose entire identity had formed around violence and destruction. On the other, Dr. Marinkongas, a neuropsychiatrist, argued there was no evidence of antisocial personality disorder or sexual sadism. He cautioned against projecting adult diagnoses onto a 15-year-old. And then there's Dr. Solier, perhaps the most interesting perspective. He initially described Marsh as cold and callous. During their first meeting, Marsh threatened to stab him in the neck with a pen and crush his head with a laptop, forcing the doctor to end the session. But years later, after re-evaluating Marsh, Solier said he observed genuine changes, increased maturity, empathy, and self-awareness. Yet he also warned that Marsh remained a clever, manipulative psychopath. And this is the question at the heart of this case, the one that divided experts, the one that still doesn't have a clear answer. Even Dr. Robert Hare, who created the PCLR, has warned that accurate psychopathy assessments in adolescents are extremely difficult and shouldn't be attempted without extensive training. The adolescent brain is still developing, particularly the prefrontal cortex, which governs impulse control, empathy, and decision-making. It doesn't fully mature until approximately age 25. Was Daniel Marsh born this way? A true psychopath from birth, someone whose brain was simply wired differently? Or was he a product of devastating childhood trauma, devastating parental abandonment, identity crisis, untreated mental illness, and undeveloped adolescent brain, who fell through every crack in the system?
The answer matters because it determines whether someone like Daniel Marsh can ever truly be rehabilitated. And that question was about to become very, very real.
Daniel Marsh went to trial as an adult. His defense team argued that antidepressant medication, specifically Zoloft, had caused temporary insanity, that the drugs, not Daniel, were responsible. The prosecution dismantled that argument. Deputy District Attorney Amanda Zambor pointed to the evidence. Daniel's violent fantasies and behavioral patterns existed before he was ever prescribed medication. He was killing animals before Zoloft. He was fantasizing about murder before Zoloft. The drug didn't create the monster. The monster was already there. The jury deliberated for under 2 hours. They found Daniel guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder, and they found him sane. The judge sentenced him to the maximum, 52 years to life. But the story was far from over. 2 years after the conviction, California voters passed Proposition 57, and this new law changed one critical thing. The decision to try a juvenile as an adult could no longer be made by the district attorney alone. It now had to go before a juvenile court judge. Marsh's lawyers immediately moved to have his case reconsidered. If successful, Daniel Marsh would be resentenced as a juvenile, and under juvenile law, he would be eligible for release at age 25. The families of Chip Northup and Claudia Maupin were devastated. Everything they'd been through, the trial, the verdict, the closure they'd fought for, could be undone. And then, something remarkable happened. Before the hearing, a video appeared online. Daniel Marsh, now 21, had delivered a TEDx talk through a prison rehabilitation program. In the talk, Marsh declared, "Hurt people hurt people." He said, "There are no such things as evil people in this world, only damaged people." He presented himself as reformed, changed, a damaged child who had found the light. He also raised a new claim, that he had been sexually abused as a child by 2 different people. A claim he had never made before, not to therapists, not to doctors, not to his best friend, not during the trial. His father believed him. Investigators and the victims' families did not. And remember what Dr. Logan said about psychopaths. I've interviewed hundreds of psychopaths, and they've all seen the light. One of the things that is very typical of the psychopath is that ability to con and manipulate. Claudia's granddaughter Sarah took action immediately and got the TEDx video removed from YouTube within 48 hours. At the hearing, Judge Samuel McAdam acknowledged that Marsh appeared to be coping well in prison. He even found some of Marsh's testimony credible. But ultimately, the judge concluded that releasing Daniel Marsh was not a risk worth taking. The original sentence stood 52 years to life. But then, California went even further. In 2018, Governor Jerry Brown signed SB 1391, a law that makes it impossible to ever try a 14 or 15-year-old offender as an adult, no matter how horrific the crime, no matter what level of torture was inflicted. Marsh's lawyers have vowed to fight for retroactive inclusion under that new law. If successful, Marsh would be resentenced as a juvenile and could eventually be released with no parole, no supervision, nothing. As of today, Daniel Marsh remains in prison. According to the California Department of Corrections, he will be eligible for parole in December 2036. The families of Chip Northup and Claudia Maupin have established something called the Victim Project, an organization fighting to ensure that cases like this one are never reclassified under laws that weren't designed with this level of violence in mind. FBI Special Agent Chris Campion, the man who sat across from a 15-year-old Daniel Marsh and listened to him describe how he'd murder him, said something that has stuck with me. Daniel Marsh is in the top 3 of the people I'm most scared of. He's got that combination of being a psychopath and this deep, dark desire for murder and bloodshed. It doesn't go away.
It just doesn't. So, what do we take from the case of Daniel Marsh? The psychology community remains divided. Was he a born psychopath? Someone whose brain was fundamentally wired without the capacity for empathy? Or was he a catastrophically damaged teenager, a product of parental abandonment, untreated mental illness, and a system that saw every warning sign and failed to intervene? The school counselor knew. 4 months before the murders, Daniel told her he fantasized about killing people. He was hospitalized and released. The therapists knew. Multiple doctors treated him for years. None connected the dots between the self-harm, the animal cruelty, the violent fantasies, and the escalating obsession with gore. The friend knew. Alvaro watched Daniel spiral, but he was 14 years old. He didn't know what to do. 128 stab wounds, 2 lives stolen, a family destroyed, a psychopathy score of 35.8, and a legal system that, depending on who you ask, either delivered justice or is still fighting to prevent a dangerous predator from walking free. Chip Northup was a World War II veteran who spent his life serving his community. Claudia Maupin was a woman who made everyone she met feel like her best friend. They deserved to grow old together. They deserve to wake up safe in their own home. They deserve to be remembered. This is True Crime Buried. We don't just tell you what happened, we dig deeper to find the why. Here's my question for you, and I genuinely want to hear your thoughts in the comments. Can a 15-year-old truly be a psychopath beyond redemption? Or does the science of adolescent brain development mean we should never give up on rehabilitation, even in a case this extreme? Let me know what you think. If this is the kind of content you want to see more of, deep psychological analysis of real criminal cases, subscribe and turn on notifications, because we've only just started digging. I'll see you in the next one.